we're having an adult discussion about this industry and treating it with the respect it deserves. It produces wealth for every other part of this country, and that's what this is about today.
Provincial government leaders were in Sarnia today, emphasizing their commitment to building an oil pipeline delivering crude to local refineries. With more on that message this morning, here's Jerry Dewan.
Stephen Lecce toured Sarnia's Kilgore Limited, a metal fabricating and construction company. The Minister of Energy and Mines used the visit to stress his government's commitment to the Northern Shield Energy Corridor, a 3,300-kilometer pipeline project.
We will work together to move this project forward, to complete the study at the end of this calendar year, and to get on with nation building through a meaningful dialogue of partnership, but ultimately moving beyond the talk to getting things done for Canada.
Lecce says a dialogue has begun with regions that will be impacted. That includes the Omnijong First Nation in Sarnia. Manitoba Premier Webb Canoe has withheld full endorsement of the project, looking for assurances that the pipeline will travel to the port of Churchill.
In good faith, we'll work with Premier Canoe, the people of Manitoba. We want to create win-win-wins. Every province, every First Nation, every community can win.
Canada is quietly changing the game, and the U.S. may not like what comes next. Instead of depending on American pipelines, Canada is planning to build its own energy future from coast to coast. If this plan succeeds, the U.S. could lose both influence and business, while Canada gains more control than ever before. Ontario Energy Minister Stephen Lecce traveled to Sarnia and stood in front of the cameras to say something that has not been said by an Ontario government official in the modern history of Canadian energy policy. Canadians know that we can no longer depend on the US. We must build energy corridors and pipelines that are sovereign to Canada. That statement, delivered at Sarnia's refining complex, accompanied the release of Ontario's formal vision document for the Northern Shield Energy Corridor, the proposed 3,300-kilometer pipeline from Hardisty, Alberta to Sarnia, Ontario. A feasibility study will be completed by the end of 2026. Ontario has initiated its duty to consult with Indigenous partners, and Sarnia is being formally positioned as the eastern gateway of a coast-to-coast Canadian energy network whose commercial logic is built entirely around eliminating American pipeline dependency. The Northern Shield Energy Corridor was jointly announced by Premier Doug Ford and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on July 6, 2026. The proposed route runs from Hardisty, Alberta's primary oil pipeline hub, eastward through Saskatchewan and Manitoba, before terminating at Sarnia's refining complex in southwestern Ontario. The entire 3,300 kilometers travel through Canadian territory. No section crosses American soil, American airspace, or American jurisdiction of any kind. That geographic fact is the pipeline's foundational commercial and strategic argument, given the documented vulnerability that Enbridge Line 5, which currently carries approximately 540,000 barrels per day of crude to Ontario and Quebec refineries, through Michigan's Upper Peninsula, has faced for years from the state government of Michigan attempting to force its closure. Sarnia's existing industrial infrastructure is the commercial foundation that makes the Northern Shield's eastern terminus commercially rational. The Sarnia-Lambton region is home to one of North America's largest refining and petrochemical clusters. The Shell refinery alone processes approximately 85,000 barrels of crude oil per day. Sarnia's refineries convert Alberta crude into the fuels that power homes, businesses, and industry across Ontario and Quebec. The city already has the refining capacity, the pipeline connections, the workforce, and the industrial supply chain that a new crude oil input pipeline requires, not as infrastructure to be built from scratch, but as an existing industrial ecosystem that would be expanded rather than created. Ontario's acting Minister of Infrastructure, Todd McCarthy, described the project's significance directly. The Northern Shield Energy Corridor is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to connect our country, strengthen energy security, and drive economic growth. That framing, once in a generation, reflects the specific historical moment the project is being advanced into. The last serious east-west Canadian oil pipeline proposal was TC Energy's Energy East project, cancelled in 2017, at an estimated project cost of $15.7 billion. After regulatory uncertainty, Quebec political opposition, and changing commercial conditions combined to make the project unviable. The Northern Shield faces some of the same challenges Energy East did, but its political backing has reached a level of explicit federal-provincial alignment that Energy East never achieved with the federal government, and both Alberta and Ontario now publicly committed to advancing it. The feasibility study Ontario has launched will define estimated costs, examine commercial models, and assess related development opportunities, including electricity grid upgrades and potential strategic petroleum reserves. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve dimension is a new addition to the corridor scope. Ontario is simultaneously commissioning a feasibility study on establishing an SPR using existing Sarnia refining, storage, and distribution infrastructure. An SPR would provide Canada with a domestic stockpile of critical fuels to protect against supply disruptions during emergencies, a capability Canada currently lacks at the national level. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve holds approximately 400 million barrels of crude oil. Canada has no equivalent national reserve. If the Northern Shield and an associated SPR are both built, Canada would simultaneously gain a sovereign east-west oil transport corridor and the emergency fuel security infrastructure that industrial economies have maintained since the 1973 oil crisis. The Manitoba dimension of the corridor adds a further commercial extension possibility. Ontario's vision document states that the proposed route would provide the Government of Manitoba and the Manitoba Crown Indigenous Corporation with the opportunity to explore the feasibility of a pipeline extension to the port of Churchill. Churchill is a deep-water Arctic port on Hudson Bay, a facility with existing bulk loading infrastructure and a rail connection to the Canadian Prairie. A pipeline extension from the Northern Shield's Manitoba corridor to Churchill would give Alberta crude a second northern tidewater export route, separate from the West Coast pipeline to Roberts Bank that Alberta submitted to the Federal Major Projects Office on July 3rd. Churchill faces severe winter navigation constraints on Hudson Bay, limiting its operational season. But as Arctic ice coverage declines, a documented multi-decade trend, the seasonal window for Churchill's viability as an export terminal is expanding. Local government, labor, and business support for the Northern Shield in southwestern Ontario is documented across multiple organizations that attended the July 15th Sarnia event. Street Clare Township Mayor Jeff Agar pointed to the Shell refinery's existing 85,000 barrel per day processing volume and thanked the Ford government for advancing the corridor vision. Sarnia-Lambton MPP Bob Bailey's statement was explicit. Connecting Alberta's vast energy resources to the Sarnia-Lambton petrochemical hub through a new, fully Canadian pipeline is the perfect example of a nation-building project that can power our collective economic growth for generations to come. The Northern Shield Energy Corridor forms part of Ontario's broader Energy for Generations strategy, described as the province's first integrated energy plan. That plan covers nuclear expansion through the Darlington SMR program, electricity grid modernization, hydrogen development, and now the east-west oil pipeline component. The Northern Shield Energy Corridor is a documented political commitment with a feasibility study underway. Everything else, financing, regulatory approvals, construction, is ahead.